Is sex work inherently harmful to women? Are e-girls ruining feminism? Are alternative sex workers promoting a culture of sexualization and fetishization of women, specifically alternative women? If you, like me, are chronically online, you may have been seeing these sentiments floating around the internet again. And now I say again because SWERF rhetoric is not new, and at times, to women, it can be incredibly appealing. SWERF stands for Sex Worker Exclusionary Radical Feminism, and a lot of these talking points have been floating around the internet on spaces like Tumblr for over a decade. The demonization of the online sex worker is likely as old as the first online sex worker. And I say that these talking points can be appealing because they often offer a false sense of control or a villain that can be immediately dealt with, or at least in a way that makes the women shaming other women feel better. Let me elaborate on both of those points. The policement of one's own behavior or the behavior of other women can offer, again, a false sense of agency or control. It offers the notion that if you adhere to a certain set of rules or guidelines, that you can avoid being harmed, usually by men. But reality, which is very harsh, tells us that our clothing and our appearance often offer no protection against these entitled and evil men who believe that they can, and who do, torture other people. I need you guys to hear me for a second. Men sexually assault animals. They assault dead bodies, they assault children, they assault other men, they assault women that society has deemed attractive, women that society has deemed unattractive, women who cover themselves up, and women who don't. The harshness of the reality of the way that we socialize men and boys under patriarchy tells us that no individual action that women can take make them safe from male violence. However, it is often much easier to blame an individual or to blame a symptom than it is to get to the root cause of an issue. I acknowledge that. But the root cause of a lot of these issues that radical feminists have that they claim is with sex workers is actually with the systems of hierarchy that we live under, such as patriarchy. Patriarchy is the idea that women are inferior or should be subservient to men. Some of the other systems that we live under are things like white supremacy, which is the idea that white people are the best or are superior at the top of the hierarchy, and that the further you are from whiteness, the worse you are, with blackness being the antithesis of whiteness under a white supremacist hierarchical structure. Capitalism is a system of hierarchy where your worth is tied to how much money you have or are able to make. Those who have the most money prioritize, placed at the top of the hierarchy, and those who have lesser than are at the bottom. And not only are they at the bottom, they are constantly demonized in all sorts of ways because those who are at the top, who do have the most resources, well, they don't want us to question their greed. So they flood the media with propaganda about how great they are and about how awful and lazy poor people are. Another one of these hierarchical systems is ableism, the idea that your worth is tied to your disability status, i.e. your ability to perform labor. If you are unable to work in our current society, you are deemed as worth less than people who can have a regular 9-to-5 or perform labor in some way. Do you see how all of these systems of hierarchy are linked, how they are all connected? Now, these systems of hierarchy, again, such as patriarchy, dictate heavily how we socialize men and boys and how those men and boys then behave in society. But the reality is that when you raise a group of people with the notion that they are better than another group of people, that they are owed obedience from another group of people, in fact, this other group of people was created by God specifically to be a servant to them and to pleasure them, very soon you have an entire society where one group is very heavily oppressed by the other due to the taught and reinforced notion that the one group is inherently superior because of some way that they were born. Now, these are absurd notions. We know that no human being is born superior because of things like their sex or the color of their skin. However, there would be little power to be wielded in a truly equal and equitable society, so those who do have power and who would like to continue to wield it often fight against equality in favor of the hierarchical systems that we currently have. Anyway, I digress back to my point. But the way that male behavior often presents under patriarchy is an absolutely bonkers level of sexualization and fetishization of women by men. It truly does not matter what women do, there is a man waiting to fetishize them for it. I mean, men wrote an entire religion around their God, creating all of womankind specifically to serve them, to be their helpmate. And both men and women internalize this societal conditioning heavily. How could we not? But things like fetishization and sexualization, things like instigative violence, right? Not reactive or defensive violence. These are two different things. But instigative violence, well, they come from these perceived notions of superiority and entitlement, not because of the behavior of the victims. Anti-sex and Puritan rhetoric tell us that women are responsible for the actions of men. But that's not true. They say that if only certain women covered themselves up more, talked back less, or behaved in certain ways, then men wouldn't sexualize us all. But that is unfortunately just not the case. And I say that these talking points often offer a villain that can be more easily reasoned with, because a lot of them are directly born from trauma. Often, sex worker exclusionary radical feminist talking points come from a very valid and justifiable reaction to men's poor behavior. And men often do not listen to women. It is very difficult to reason with someone who does not view you as worth listening to. And a grand restructuring of our society is a very daunting and sometimes seemingly impossible task when half the people out there immediately disregard folks for simply being born the wrong sex. So women often fall back on reasoning with, arguing with, shaming, policing, or blaming other women. So a lot of women instead buy into the notion that if only some women didn't go along with the way that they are sexualized within society, that maybe society wouldn't be this way. But women taking agency over a reality that would exist whether they took agency over their sexuality or not are not the reasons for the very real problems that plague our society. As an example to make my point, please consider feminist icon Elle Woods. The 2001 movie Legally Blonde follows main character Reese Witherspoon as she applies and enrolls in Harvard Law School after being dumped by her boyfriend for essentially being too vapid. Now, he doesn't explicitly call her too vapid when he breaks up with her, but he does say that he's interested in a career in politics, and so he needs a Jackie, not a Marilyn, referring to Jackie Kennedy over Marilyn Monroe, prompting our protagonist to ask him, "You're breaking up with me because I'm too blonde?" And what follows then is an hour and a half of a brilliant woman proving her brilliance while never once sacrificing her love of the feminine and therefore societally deemed vapid. Now, Elle's character is brilliant. From the jump, it's made pretty clear that she is an exceptional student whose passion happens to be fashion. When she decides that she wants to go to Harvard, she meets with her school's advisor, who is another woman, who tells her that Harvard isn't going to care that she was the president of the sorority or that she aced the history of polka dots, and tells her that a 4.0 in fashion merchandising won't be impressive to them. But hear me, that's still a 4.0. Again, Elle Woods is an exceptional student, but her love and passion for things that are considered feminine mean that during the entire movie, we watch people disregard, sometimes bully, and consistently underestimate her. Despite that meeting with her counselor, which many would take as discouraging, she pivots, spends the whole summer studying, and gets a 179 on her LSAT, which is a pretty high score. Now, for her admissions essay, she films a video, which does include shots of her in a bikini at the pool, and she gets accepted by a group of white men who are on, I guess, the acceptance board at Harvard Law, and they sort of frame it as a joke, that a bunch of these men are pushing for her acceptance because they're attracted to her. But as a couple of them are arguing for her to be accepted, they do list an impressive resume with a bunch of impressive extracurriculars. And by the end of the movie, sorry, spoiler alert here, as a student attorney, she ends up winning a case where her client was on trial for murder. She proves her client was innocent, again, as a student attorney. She's great. Now, I know that it's a movie, but I would argue that there's a very good chance that if Elle did not submit that video essay, despite, again, her excellent grades and her being an excellent student, especially with her score on the LSAT, I still think that there's a very good chance that she does not get accepted, because after all, she was still a fashion merchandising major. I want to ask you a couple of questions that may seem absurd given everything that we've just talked about. But by making that admissions video, was Elle participating in an anti-feminist act by utilizing every tool she had to her advantage? Did Elle making that video create the culture wherein her sexuality could be leveraged in such a way? I would argue no to both of those things, right? In a society that is set up to keep women contained in very small boxes, which often includes the denial of opportunity either outright or favor of either equally qualified or lesser qualified men. Is a woman taking agency over or utilizing her sexuality counterproductive to the idea that women deserve equality? I mean, maybe it would be if men's treatment of women was dependent on women's behavior. The way that women's treatment of men is often a reaction to or dependent on men's treatment of them, being again that we live in a hierarchical system. So unless that hierarchy were flipped or equalized, those who are at the bottom of the hierarchy cannot actively oppress those who are at the top. Women can be mean to men individually, of course, but there are no systems that are currently set up to back the abuse and exploitation of men in order to keep them in a subservient role to women based purely off of their gender, right? So misandry is not a system of oppression, but is rather a direct reaction to the very systems that do exist to oppress and justify the oppression of women, again, solely based on their gender. Misogyny, however, is an instigative bigotry that is not based on the way that women behave. It is an unreasonable and illogical notion based on predetermined delusion that women are inferior. Women taking agency over or leveraging their sexuality to further themselves in a society that is set up to prevent their success is not the reason why men sexualize women. And ultimately, these takes, reduced down to their core, are blaming women for the often despicable behavior of men. Right? Even in our movie, critics of Elle in Legally Blonde never talk about Warner, who is the man who dumps her, who only got into Harvard because his daddy made a phone call. Right? In a culture that is so anti-sex and anti-woman, folks would rather demonize a woman for utilizing the way that she looks because working hard is not enough for women to be ensured consideration, over a man who did not have to work hard because of nepotism. And in similar fashion to the several women in the beginning of the movie who are more concerned about Elle Woods simply being around and being overtly feminine than if all of the men who are around them are actually deserving of their acceptance into Harvard, women on TikTok are getting mad at sex workers because they believe that other women are responsible for male behavior or that other women are their competition. But this opinion is misguided and it ignores real solidarity and real intelligence in favor of sexist and appearance-based judgments. The sexualization of alternative women predates e-girls, it predates online sex work, and it predates the alt-bop house, and women capitalizing off of a culture that we cannot control, where our options are severely limited, is not an anti-feminist act. Please be serious. Just because a bunch of very young radical feminists who are more angry at those who work within a system than the system itself told you that it was, does not make those takes true. The reality is that if every sex worker disappeared off the face of the planet tomorrow, fetishization of women and sexual violence against women at the hands of men would not stop, because sex workers are simply that. Workers. Sex work is not synonymous with trafficking, sex work is not synonymous with abuse, and even if you are thoroughly convinced that it is, shaming individuals will never save anyone from an industry, regardless of how predatory you feel that industry is. In fact, shame makes those who are experiencing abuse within the industry less safe. This industry is criminalized, so people cannot go to the proper authorities when abuse happens because, again, it is a criminalized industry, and they won't come to you if you're somebody who has made it clear that you will blame them for their own situation because of the job that they have to do for any number of reasons. But taking a job consensually does not mean that you are being coerced to do something, and exploitation exists within every area because we are living under capitalism. These radical feminist takes are regressive, and they are far-right talking points that are repackaged in a way that deludes women into believing that they are responsible or they can somehow dictate men's behavior, and we can't. Men, right, not boys, but men are adults who are perfectly capable of treating others with respect. Men treat other men with respect all the time. Focusing more on the women who are doing a job rather than the men who are being weird little freaks to you out of their own volition, I mean, it's a choice. Again, this is not a new or a radical stance. This is simply anti-sex, anti-woman, and anti-worker.